My name is Ivy. I'm 34 years old, currently living and working in Austin, Texas. I own a small company specializing in HVAC systems. I don't have a college degree, no fancy titles. Just a pair of hands always covered in machine oil and years of bills paid on time for my family. And yet, this past Thanksgiving, when I walked into the very house I helped pay for, my younger sister turned to the well-dressed guests and said, "She's just a distant cousin. Works in maintenance." My mother gently pulled me aside and whispered, "Don't embarrass Julia in front of her in-laws." Have you ever been rejected by your own flesh and blood just because you didn't live up to their standards? If this story hits a wound in you, feel free to leave a comment. Hit like if you believe a person's worth isn't measured by a diploma or a suit. And don't forget to subscribe, because what they didn't expect is exactly what I'm about to do next. I drove home in the middle of the night, headlights gliding across the windshield like cold streaks of light brushing against memories that hadn't yet faded. My chest was heavy, but not from the cold. It was from that tight, choking feeling in my throat that I didn't know how to name. Anger? Hurt? Or just plain exhaustion after years of doing the right thing. The narrow road leading back to the house I was renting felt longer than usual. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't call anyone, didn't cry. I just wanted to get home and finally face the truth I'd been avoiding for far too long. When I stepped into the living room, the wall clock struck midnight. I set my keys on the table, took off my coat, and poured myself a glass of water. No wine, no pills, just water. I needed clarity. Tonight, I wanted to look back at everything I'd done for this family. Not to complain, but to remind myself I wasn't imagining things. I opened my laptop and sat down at the worn-out dining table by the window. The screen lit up, showing the banking portal I used to transfer money to Julia and my parents every month. I clicked into the payment history section, then filtered by recipient. The name Julia Monroe popped up consistently like clockwork. Some months $3,000, some months $5,000. A few had notes: fall semester tuition, roof repair, deposit for mom's new apartment. I clicked total. The screen displayed a number that made me sit back in silence. $97,420.13. Almost $100,000. Over the past 5 years. I leaned back in my chair, arms limp at my sides. I never counted every dollar. I never asked anyone to pay me back. I did it because I believed it was right. Because Julia was once the little sister I adored. The girl who cried in my arms when our parents forced her into law school. I believed if I gave her just a little more time, a little more support, she could have a life better than mine. What I didn't expect was that one day she'd look at me like I was the hired help. No, at least the hired help usually gets introduced by name. I still remember when I was 23 and dropped out of college to come home and care for Dad after his first stroke. Julia was still in high school then, frail and scared. I took on HVAC repair jobs, then added water heater installations, and eventually expanded to full thermal system maintenance. None of that required a degree, just hard-working hands and a decent mind for calculations. Every time Julia had exams, I took extra night shifts, skipped weekends just to make sure the money got there on time. I used to slip $200 bills into an envelope, handwrite a note. "Keep going, you'll be the best lawyer in this family." I don't have a single letter from her in return. Maybe because there never were any. And there were never any thank yous either. I scrolled through the details and saw the most recent payment from 3 weeks ago. $2,850. Purpose: public administration course tuition. Julia once told me she wanted to become a lawyer for the mayor's office. I remember feeling proud. Now I'm not even sure whose dream I've been funding. My phone buzzed softly. A message from Aunt Delilah, a distant cousin on mom's side I still send holiday gifts to. The message was brief. "Ivy, are you okay? Heard something happened at Julia's tonight." I didn't reply. I didn't know how. I didn't want to explain anymore why I got kicked out of a family dinner moments after walking in, just because I wore my work uniform. They can call me a technician, a blue-collar worker, anything they think is beneath them. But there's one thing they can't deny. I was the one who kept their house from foreclosure. I was the one who made sure Julia's college dream didn't collapse. I was the one who paid Dad's hospital bills when Mom lost her insurance. I walked to the corner cabinet and pulled out a small, deep blue box where I kept all the receipts. Some were yellowed, the ink faded, but still legible. Each slip of paper was a record of something I gave, without calculation, without asking for anything back. The more I looked at them, the tighter my chest felt. Not because of the money, but because of what it meant. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, they'd finally see me. That they'd say my name properly when guests arrived. That someone would say, "My sister is the smartest person I know." But all they saw was that I didn't wear office clothes, didn't sit at a desk, didn't have a degree hanging on the wall. I turned back to the table and stared at the screen. That 97,000 still glowed like a slap across the face. I slowly closed the laptop, took a deep breath, and turned on the light in my home office. Tomorrow I was going to do something I should have done a long time ago. I was going to cross my name off the list of people they could take advantage of. No shouting. No arguments. Just pulling my hand back and letting them take care of each other from now on. The next morning, pale sunlight slipped through the window blinds, falling across the dark hardwood floor. I sat in the armchair, still in my pajamas from the night before, a cup of cold coffee in hand. The laptop screen still glowed faintly, the banking portal blurred in the soft morning haze. I hadn't slept. Not because I was spiraling or depressed like people love to assume, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying the words Julia and Mom had said last night, as if someone was forcing me to memorize them. I picked up the phone and hesitated for a few seconds before calling Mom. I wanted to hear her voice. I wanted some kind of explanation, or at least a trace of regret. After all, I was still her daughter. I held on to a sliver of hope, however fragile, that maybe she was just momentarily swayed by Julia. The phone rang 3 times, then 4. On the 5th it went to voicemail. I sat still, holding the phone to my ear, waiting for the familiar tone of her recorded greeting. But her voicemail was empty. No greeting. No prompt to leave a message. Just a cold beep, like even the machine didn't want me to speak. I didn't leave a message. About 10 minutes later, while I was washing dishes, the phone started to vibrate. I quickly dried my hands on the kitchen towel and picked it up, hoping it was Mom. But the name on the screen wasn't hers. It was Aunt Carol. I tapped to accept the call and pressed the phone to my ear. Aunt Carol is Mom's younger sister, the one who always called me a good kid but too headstrong. "Hello," I said, my voice hoarse from fatigue. "Ivy, it's Aunt Carol," her voice still soft like always but with hesitation. "I don't want to interfere with family matters, but last night, what happened? Your mom said you seemed a bit out of control." I froze. The glass in my hand nearly slipped. "Out of control? You mean, my mom told you I lost control?" I asked again, trying to stay calm. "She sounded worried," Aunt Carol continued, hesitating. "She said you showed up dressed inappropriately, acted tense around the guests. Julia was crying, said you ruined the evening." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. All I did was walk in with a pie and a jacket with my company logo on it. I sat on the couch for barely 3 minutes before I was pulled aside and asked to leave. And now, in my mother's version of the story, I had turned into the one who ruined the party. The one who made Julia cry. I clenched the phone in my hand, feeling a chill deep in my chest. "You know," I said slowly, "I've paid nearly $100,000 for my sister over the past 5 years. Tuition, rent, even repairs on our parents' house." A long silence followed. I could hear a soft sigh on the other end. "No, I didn't know," she said. "Your mother told me your parents were supporting Julia. She never mentioned you." I let out a dry laugh, one without humor. There was a time I believed silence was noble. But now that silence had twisted the truth, painting me as some kind of villain in the very story I had poured my sweat, tears, and youth into building for this family. I just stood there. I went on, introduced in front of the guests as a distant cousin, a technician. My mother didn't say a word about who I actually was. She just stood there, looked at me, then pulled me aside and said I should go home, to preserve Julia's image. A long sigh came through the line. So long I thought she might hang up. "Ivy," she finally said, "I'm sorry I didn't know sooner. But you know, your mother has always cared a lot about appearances. She's been that way since we were kids. So now I'm just supposed to accept being smeared in front of family?" I asked bitterly, "just because I don't look the way she wants me to?" "That's not it," she said gently. "But sometimes, older folks think anyone who doesn't follow the exact mold is being rebellious. I don't agree with it, but I understand why they think that way." I swallowed hard. Phrases like that, I'd heard them my entire life. I used to believe I could outgrow those judgments if I just lived right and quietly gave what I could. But now I realized, The quieter you are in your sacrifices, the easier it is for people to erase you when it suits them. I thanked Aunt Carol and hung up. My eyes didn't tear up, but my heart throbbed painfully. I opened my messages, and this time, instead of calling my mother, I scrolled down to the old texts. One where she had once written, "Hang in there, I'm proud of you." That was when I had just launched the company. The message was from 3 years ago. After that, there were dozens of short ones. "Julia needs to pay tuition urgently. Can you front the roof repair costs? Your father needs new dentures." Not a single message asking how I was. I understood now. In their eyes, I wasn't a daughter or a sister or a niece anymore. I was the one who paid. A walking wallet. And yesterday, when that wallet showed up without polish or shine, they decided they didn't need it anymore. I set my phone down and I no longer hoped for an apology. I didn't need them to say sorry. I just needed them to stop taking me for granted. But maybe that day will never come from them. Bryce Langston was not the kind of man easily fooled by appearances. As a prosecutor working at the Travis County office, he had seen more than enough people dressed in perfection but hollow inside, and just as many who walked quietly through others' lives leaving real impact without ever boasting. When he first met Julia Monroe at a charity gala, he had been drawn to her elegance and the way she skillfully steered conversations. Julia knew how to make others feel important, knew exactly when to smile and when to speak. Which is why her first comments about her family had surprised him. "I'm the only one in the family with a college degree," Julia had said over dinner at an Italian bistro downtown. "My sister started but dropped out. She's in HVAC now. Had a bankruptcy once. My family, they don't really get the world I'm trying to step into." Bryce raised his brows at that but didn't press further. He respected people's pasts. But a part of him began to pay closer attention. And that instinct only grew stronger after that Thanksgiving dinner. Julia had come home visibly irritated, slamming the bedroom door and staying silent for the rest of the evening. When Bryce asked what happened, she only shook her head and muttered. She showed up unannounced again. "I told Mom not to let her get awkward in front of the guests. And she came wearing her work clothes, Bryce. There was grease on her shirt, mud on her boots. It's like she didn't realize there were important people there." Bryce nodded but felt something off. He had never met Ivy, but the way Julia spoke made her sister seem like a clueless outsider. And yet, there was something in Julia's eyes, not sadness but a strange mix of confusion and embarrassment, that unsettled him. A few days later, while Bryce was working from Julia's house, he needed some paperwork for tax prep. Julia handed him a box with her personal documents, water bills, tuition notices, and a few bank transfer slips. As he leafed through them, not intentionally snooping, one name began repeating. Ivy Bennett. Over a dozen receipts, each showing transfers from Ivy Bennett to Julia Monroe. Amounts ranging from $2,000 to $5,000. Noted clearly, fall semester tuition, condo payments, summer course fees. Bryce slowly set the papers down. He said nothing out loud, but inside, a tide of questions was already rising. After dinner, while Julia was washing her hair in the bathroom, he sat with his laptop. As a prosecutor, he was used to tracing financial records, verifying identities. Within minutes, using public databases, he found Ivy's business information. Bennett Air Solutions, owner. Ivy Bennett, Austin, Texas. The business address was listed as a refurbished warehouse. Services: HVAC installation, maintenance, and technical consulting for commercial systems. One local news article caught his eye. A female entrepreneur with no college degree, but a multi-million-dollar contract with St. Mary's Hospital System. The photo showed a woman standing in front of a service truck bearing the Bennett Air Solutions logo. She wore a navy blue work jacket, hair tied back, no makeup. Her expression was calm and sharp. No one needed to tell him. This was Ivy. Bryce felt a chill, not fear but recognition. Most of what Julia had said about her sister had been reshaped, if not outright hidden. Julia never mentioned Ivy owned a business. Never said Ivy had paid all her tuition. Certainly never said the condo she lived in was co-financed under Ivy's name. He recalled a conversation from a week earlier when Julia fretted about next month's tuition, saying she wasn't sure how she'd cover it, but probably Mom and Dad will figure it out. Now he knew exactly who Mom and Dad really were. He didn't bring it up that night. But something shifted in the way he looked at her. When Julia asked, "What's wrong? You've been quiet since dinner," Bryce only shook his head. "It's nothing. Just tired." But he wasn't tired from work. He was exhausted from realizing there was a different face to the woman sitting across from him. And the scariest part was, Julia didn't seem to think she'd done anything wrong. She poured wine, talked about her plans for a master's program, then added cheerfully, "Hope next year you can meet my family at the engagement party. But maybe just invite my parents. Ivy, you know, always makes things dramatic." Bryce didn't respond. His mind kept circling back to the image of Ivy standing beside her truck, eyes steady, shoulders burdened but unbent. Someone like her. Was she really someone to be hidden away? And if Julia could hide a truth this big, how many other things had she already twisted to fit her version of reality? That question quietly grew in Bryce's mind little by little. And he knew that sooner or later he'd have to find the answer. Not for Ivy's sake, but because he could no longer look at Julia the same way. I started that morning by brewing myself a strong cup of coffee. No sugar, no cream, no compromise. Just like what I was about to do. Sunlight slanted through the window, falling on my desk where my laptop was already open. Each browser tab displaying the veins of a life I had quietly built piece by piece. I wasn't someone who exploded with anger. I didn't break things, scream, or write long dramatic posts online begging for sympathy. But I remember. And I remembered every word Julia said in front of others about me, the cold look on my mother's face when I stepped into that house, the way my entire extended family sat silent and complicit as I was pushed to the side like an extra chair nobody asked for. I started with the house. The apartment Julia was living in sat in North Austin, near the University District. I had paid half the down payment so she could qualify for a mortgage when her credit wasn't enough. I didn't want to co-sign officially, so I funneled the money through a third-party entity, Bennett Advisory, a small financial branch I had set up specifically to handle family support, separate from my main business. I logged into the commercial bank's account management system and pulled up the apartment file. Monthly payments, $2,150. Official payer, Bennett Advisory. Julia Monroe was listed as a co-owner, but not the primary borrower. I straightened my posture, moved the cursor to the Cancel Autopay button. A warning box popped up. "Are you sure you want to stop recurring payments? This may result in late fees or foreclosure." I clicked Confirm. No dramatic music, no special effects, just the soft sound of a keystroke. But to me it sounded like freedom. Next, I opened my email and found the scholarship account for Blue Oak Future Girls. A program I had funded anonymously, with the main recipient being Layla Monroe, my niece, Julia's daughter. That child never deserved to be hurt, and I once believed that even if I couldn't help Julia, I could at least help Layla. But I realized the more I stayed silent, the more it allowed the adults in this family to turn me into a walking wallet, not a human being. I wrote to Layla's school principal. "Dear Mrs. Hutchins, I am writing to inform you that the scholarship provided by the Blue Oak Future Girls Fund will be discontinued for student Layla Monroe beginning next semester. This decision stems from a review of ethical suitability and transparency regarding the student's legal guardians. I regret any inconvenience this may cause and will support the school in finding alternative scholarships if necessary. Sincerely, IB." I sat back for a moment, arms crossed. I had done two things. Taken back the home they once claimed they couldn't live without, and cut off the tuition stream Julia had boasted to friends about, saying it came from her parents' private fund. Finally, I opened a file tucked away in a private folder labeled Langston Project. This was a sponsorship contract for an energy improvement initiative within a network of public hospitals, soon to be signed by my company, Bennett Air Solutions. The proposal had come from Lawn Tech Infrastructure, a firm I knew was preparing to partner with Bryce Langston's law office, Julia's current boyfriend. Over the past few months, I'd quietly done my homework. Lawn Tech and Bryce were negotiating for him to become the legal rep for their environmental projects tied to local government. But if his name were to be linked to someone with questionable ethics or unclear financial backing, it could seriously affect his standing with high-level partners in both the healthcare and construction sectors. I typed a brief email addressed to the project director at St. Mary's Hospital. "Dear Mr. Clarkson, following our recent internal review, We've decided to temporarily suspend cooperation with any entities affiliated with lawn tech infrastructure until we complete a thorough background check on their legal representatives and third-party associates. We value our long-standing relationship with your hospital and remain committed to upholding ethical standards and transparency in all activities. Sincerely, Ivy Bennett, CO Bennett Air Solutions. I hit send. No one knew I was behind it. No one had yet connected the contract delay to Julia's behavior. They hadn't realized the financial cord no longer connected to their pockets. But they would soon. I leaned back in my chair looking out the window. Austin stretched out quietly in the morning sun. I didn't feel triumphant or even guilty. Just one thing clearly: I'd let them get too comfortable seeing me as a bottomless supply. What I did now wasn't revenge. It was just stopping. Letting them finally face the truth they had buried for years. I was updating next week's employee assignments when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Mom calling. I let it ring. Less than 2 minutes later, Dad calling. Then 3 more missed calls followed by a message from Mom, just 4 words: "Ivy, call me now." I set the phone down, kept working. I knew exactly why they were calling. And I knew I wasn't giving in. Not even an hour later, the doorbell rang. I looked up at the front camera and instantly recognized the familiar figures. It was Dad. Behind him stood Mom, her face tense, clutching that old handbag she always brought out whenever there was something important to say. I hesitated for a few seconds, then pressed the unlock button. They walked in without waiting for an invitation. Mom headed straight for the living room like it was still the house she used to run. Her eyes scanned the tidy, quiet space before landing on me. "Ivy," she began, her voice cold but rushed. "What are you doing? Layla doesn't have her scholarship anymore. The school called this morning. And Julia, she got a notice from the bank about foreclosure. What the hell is going on?" Dad stood next to her, one hand gripping the arm of the chair. He was always a man of few words, but the judgment in his eyes felt no different than a shouted accusation. I looked directly into Mom's eyes and answered slowly, "It's not my concern." "What?" She froze. "What do you mean, not your concern? You're the one who set up the scholarship. You're the one who helped fund Julia's apartment. Are you abandoning your family now?" I stood up, unervingly calm. "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just done being treated like an ATM." "That's your niece," Mom nearly shouted. "She's only 10, Ivy. How could you?" I cut her off, my voice low. "Do you know who I was at that dinner party?" She fell silent. Dad glanced over, his brow tightening. "I walked into that house and you avoided my eyes. Then you pulled me aside like I was a stranger. Julia called me her distant cousin in front of your guests. You said nothing. You didn't correct her. You didn't protect me. You just told me to leave." Mom bit her lip, saying nothing. I continued. "And now that the scholarship's gone and the house is being repossessed, that's when you all remember I exist. But before that, not a single message. Not one check-in. People only reach out when they need money. No one needs me when I'm in pain, when I'm disappointed, when I'm humiliated in front of strangers in the very house I helped pay for." Dad still said nothing, but his expression softened. Mom sat down slowly, her hand gripping the strap of her old handbag. "I understand. You want to make a point. You're hurt. But Ivy, this is family. If we start keeping score in a family..." I let out a laugh. It wasn't joyful. It was tired. Family isn't supposed to be about silent exploitation and turning your back when someone's no longer convenient to show off. If you say I'm keeping score, then yes, I am. I'm finally tallying up everything I gave. And I've chosen to stop. That's all. Mom turned to Dad, maybe hoping he'd take her side. But he shook his head slowly. "She's right," he said, voice low and firm. "She's done more than enough. I never knew Ivy paid Julia's full tuition. I always thought it was from some community scholarship." Mom looked stunned. "You told your father?" I shook my head. "I never told anyone. But I don't see a reason to keep it quiet anymore." Mom leaned back, exhaling sharply. Her voice had dropped, her exhaustion showing through every line in her face. "What's Julia going to do now?" she asked quietly. "She's about to be kicked out of the house. And without school, how will Layla live?" I looked at her, my tone softened. "I don't hate Layla. But I can't keep supporting her while you and your daughter treat me like a burden." If Layla truly needs help, then teach Julia to take responsibility instead of using family ties to pressure others into carrying her weight. She looked down. Dad stood and placed a hand on her shoulder. Let's go, Margie. The more we talk, the worse this gets. I watched them walk out. I didn't follow. I didn't rush to close the door. When I finally heard the engine start and fade into the distance, I sat back down, letting out a long breath. It didn't feel like victory. It wasn't revenge. It felt more like a quiet cleansing, like I had finally said what I should have said years ago. I looked around the room. It was still the same, quiet, neat, full of light. But something had shifted. I knew that from this moment forward, my family dynamics would never return to what they were. And I didn't want them to. I had no intention of attending the family gathering this year. I'd skipped it most years. Those formal events filled with shallow conversations, empty compliments, and judgmental glances. But I wasn't avoiding it. This time I was going to speak. Not for myself, but to make sure everyone in that room knew I would no longer be the one hiding in the shadows. The gathering was hosted at Uncle David's house, Mom's older brother. It was the usual location for traditional occasions. In the backyard, they had set up a white canopy. The chairs and tables were arranged in a U-shape, with a long table in the middle covered in linen and dotted with yellow chrysanthemums that had already begun to wilt. Relatives clustered in small groups, chatting about the weather, gas prices, diabetes, and winter insurance plans. No one noticed when I walked in through the back gate holding a thick folder in my black tote. I wore a simple navy blue dress, hair tied up, no makeup. I wasn't there to look good. I was there to be seen. I walked along the rows of chairs, nodding to each person. Some nodded back. Others looked away, unsure how to act. I knew they had heard things, maybe from someone, maybe somewhere, but in communities like this, rumors traveled faster than the November wind. Julia was by the drink table, holding a glass of red wine, wearing a pale beige dress I once helped pay for, with sapphire earrings I gave her when she graduated. When she saw me, she hesitated but quickly put on a stiff smile and walked over. Ivy, you made it. I thought you might be too busy. I looked at her but said nothing. Then I turned and raised my voice. Can I have everyone's attention for a moment? Just a few minutes, please. The chatter faded. Heads turned. Some were curious, some confused, a few visibly uneasy. I opened my bag and took out the folder, carefully sorted into sections. I laid it on the table in front of me and pulled out the first sheet. I won't take long. I know many of you have heard things about what's been going on between me and my family. I won't retell it emotionally. I brought proof. I held up the first page, my voice clear. This is a bank statement. Over the past 3 years, my account transferred funds directly to Julia Monroe's account. Total amount, $46,500. I flipped the page. This is the mortgage document for the house on Brookside. My name is on it through a finance company I created. Without me, that mortgage would have never been approved. Another page. This is the law school tuition bill. It wasn't Julia's parents who paid for it. It was me. Every semester from the beginning to now. Not a word was spoken. Julia stood frozen. I looked her straight in the eyes. And this is the last thing I want to say to all of you who called me that distant cousin, or the technician. The one you thought wasn't good enough to sit at the Thanksgiving table. I paused, then spoke slowly and clearly. The unqualified technician you all looked down on, supported this entire family for 7 years. When my mother needed dental surgery, I paid. When my father needed knee surgery, I covered the hospital bill. When Layla needed a scholarship, I created an anonymous fund in her name. I scanned the room. No one met my eyes. Julia raised a hand to her mouth, eyes filling with tears. But when I walked into the house, you looked away. When I needed a seat at the table, you called me a nuisance. When I no longer fit your picture-perfect family portrait, I was erased. You called me the distant cousin. I heard it. I was there. I heard everything. A faint sob escaped from Julia. She stepped back, lips pressed tight, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean to, she whispered. I just wanted everything to be perfect that day. I didn't interrupt. I simply watched her. I'm sorry, she said. I slowly folded the file and set it down on the table. I don't need an apology. I just need the truth to be clear. In front of everyone. No one in this room gets to pretend they didn't know anymore. From this moment on, I will no longer be the one standing silently in the background. No one spoke up to defend Julia. Not a word in her favor. She stood there, her shoulders trembling, eyes red and swollen, but no one approached her. No one could turn away and pretend anymore. I left the family gathering in silence. No farewells, no lingering glances. But I didn't need any. I had made them hear me. And more importantly, to remember me. A week after the reunion, I was at my office when Olivia, my assistant, walked in holding a tablet. Ivy, she said softly, setting the device in front of me, this article is spreading fast online. Looks like someone wrote about you. I looked up, not surprised, just calmly taking the tablet from her. The screen displayed an article on the local news platform Austin Voice. The headline read in bold, "Woman builds multi-million-dollar company from HVAC work, disowned by family for lacking a college degree." I stared quietly at the opening line. I don't have a law degree, I never studied business management, and I don't wear a suit to meetings. I repair air conditioners, install heating systems, and supported my younger sister for 7 years. But on Thanksgiving Day, I was left standing outside the very house I helped pay for, because my relatives thought I wasn't classy enough to introduce to their guests. The article didn't name names. The writer used "I" throughout, telling the story in a simple but aching voice, like words I'd whispered to myself in the quiet of late nights. I didn't know who had written it. Maybe someone who attended the reunion, maybe a relative who had seen what happened and finally wanted to speak up. But whoever it was, they understood my story better than my own flesh and blood ever did. I scrolled down to keep reading. The details matched my life almost exactly. From the apartment on the north side of Austin to the tuition payments made through a finance company founded by the uncredentialed sister. The article ended with a line that caught in my throat. She didn't need a seat at their table. She built her own, with hands stained by grease but a heart that never carried dirt. I said nothing. Olivia looked at me for a moment, then quietly stepped back and closed the door behind her. I left the article open on my screen. I didn't feel relief, but I didn't feel burdened either. Just the quiet sense that something long buried had finally been spoken aloud for me. 3 days later, Julia called me. I didn't answer. Then came the text. "Did you have something to do with the article? Mom says it has to be you. I thought you were better than this, Ivy. How could you humiliate me in front of the whole city?" I stared at the screen, then turned it off. That same day, I heard Bryce had moved out of Julia's apartment. An old friend of mine who used to work at the same law firm as him sent me a short message. He turned down the lawn tech project. Seems like he found out everything. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel vindicated. But deep in my chest there was a clear sense. Every lie eventually comes at a cost. Just a few days later, Julia received an official email from Layla's elementary school. It stated that the student would not be able to continue attending unless tuition was paid within 5 days. I knew this because the sender was Principal Hutchins, the same person who had thanked me 2 years ago for sponsoring 3 underprivileged female students. Julia's mother called me that day. I didn't answer. She left a long voicemail. "Ivy, it's Mom. What are you thinking letting Layla get expelled? She's just a child. She did nothing wrong. I know Julia made mistakes, but you need to think twice. Don't take your anger out on that little girl. She's family, Ivy. Blood." I listened to the whole thing but didn't reply. I used to be the daughter who believed in the word family. And because I believed for too long, I forgot that being blood doesn't mean you get to treat others like tools. Then came the shift. The same relatives who once praised Julia as the pride of the Monroe family began turning their backs. An aunt in Dallas canceled Julia's invitation to speak at a career day event. A cousin who used to brag that Julia studied law and was marrying a prosecutor changed his tone, telling colleagues she seemed dishonest and not very trustworthy. Those whispers didn't go straight to Julia's ears, but they spread far enough for everyone to hear. One afternoon, while I was checking a heating unit at a nursing home, our company's newest client, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then picked up. The voice was deep and familiar. "Ivy. It's Bryce." I paused. "Hello," I said evenly. "I know I don't have the right to ask anything, but I have to say this. I've left Julia." I also turned down every contract connected to lawn tech. I didn't know everything until recently. I leaned back against the brick wall, still holding my wrench. I'm not expecting an apology from you. I'm not calling to apologize, he said, hesitating. I just wanted to say, what you did I understand now. And I think you were right. I didn't reply. Just the soft clinking of metal tools in my hand. He ended the call with one sentence I'll never forget. If anyone ever asks me who the strongest person I've met is, I'll say Ivy Bennett, the woman with no degree who could teach an entire family what integrity means. I hung up without a word. But inside something settled, like a still lake after a storm. Not because someone praised me, but because someone had finally seen the truth. Not through rumors. Not through illusions. But through what I had done. And what I had chosen to stop doing. I received a handwritten letter from my mother on a Saturday morning while checking the supply warehouse with our maintenance supervisor. The envelope was ivory-colored. The handwriting was slanted and familiar. And the name on the front read my full name, Ivy Margaret Bennett, not Sweetie or Little Ivy like she used to call me in years past. I didn't open it right away. I left it sitting on my desk for almost a week, buried under a pile of audit papers and new contracts. Every now and then I'd glance at it while waiting for the printer or brewing coffee, but I never touched it. I wasn't afraid of what was inside. I just wasn't sure I expected anything from that voice anymore. One late evening when the office lights had all gone dark, I sat alone in the conference room. The warm yellow light cast long shadows across the wooden table. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten page. Black ink evenly spaced. Neat just like my mother always was. Ivy, I'm not writing this letter to blame you and not to beg either. I just want to say I miss you. The house is quiet without the voice of my eldest daughter, strangely cold and still. I don't dare call anymore, afraid you won't want to hear. But every time I walk past your old room, I think about those nights you stayed up cutting study cards for Julia, or those days you rushed home just to make sure your father took his meds. What happened this year? Maybe I was too busy protecting Julia's reputation to remember what was fair. I admit I was wrong. But I hope one day you'll come back. We're still a family. And I'm still your mother no matter what's been said between us. If you can't forgive, I understand. But if there's even the smallest crack left in your heart, I hope you'll open it. Not for me, but for yourself. I set the letter down, gently gripping its edge. My mother's tone wasn't sharp like usual. No blaming, no control. She wrote like a mother who had lost her daughter. And in a small corner of my heart I softened. I stood, took the letter to the makeshift kitchen behind the office. I pulled a lighter from the drawer and lit the edge of the paper. The small flame crept along the handwriting, curling it into thin ash. I let the page burn completely in the sink without shedding a single tear. I forgave her, but I didn't go back. Some relationships aren't meant to be patched with weak glue when the core has already cracked from wounds no one dares to name. I got in my car and drove home in silence. The Texas night stretched on, streetlights fading in the rear view. My heart felt empty, but not the kind of empty that comes from being lost. The kind of empty that follows the release of an old burden. I no longer needed my mother's validation to know my worth. A few days later I got a text from an unknown number. Just one line, I know you were the one who helped me. I'm sorry I stayed silent. You don't have to forgive my mom, but please don't hate me. I looked at the sender's name. Layla Monroe. I remembered the last time I saw that little girl, at a Christmas party 3 years ago, sitting by the window with a book, unaware that the biggest gift under the tree, a purple bicycle, was from me. Julia had said it was from the whole family. I replied, I never hated you, but I hope you grow up to be someone who doesn't need anyone to lie for her. Layla wrote back, I want to grow on my own. Not lean on anyone. But if I get to study, I'll study like it matters. I smiled, then opened my email and drafted a message to the company's legal team. I requested the creation of an official scholarship fund under a new name, Bennett Foundation for Working Class Girls. No more anonymous sponsorships. No more quiet funding behind the curtain. I specified that Layla Monroe would be the first recipient, but all processing would follow the foundation's standard protocol. No exceptions. No special treatment. I wanted her to know that if someone lifts you up, you'd better learn to walk with your back straight. That night, I printed a hard copy of the scholarship offer, signed it myself, and sealed it in a white envelope bearing the new foundation logo, 3 interlocking circles representing labor, dignity, and learning. I placed the envelope in the mailbox near Layla's home without sending any notice ahead. No one needed to know. No one needed to thank me. I just wanted that among the wreckage I left behind, something new could begin, not to fix the past but to plant something better for the future. And if Layla was the first in the family to understand that, then at least I wasn't the last one left standing alone. That Christmas Eve, I wasn't with family. I wasn't in any house strung with decorative lights, not sitting by a fireplace listening to classical carols, or waiting for someone to call me to the dinner table. I stayed at the office. Not because of urgent work, but because this place, with its soft ceiling lights and the hum of a quiet printer in the background, felt truly peaceful. On the desk in front of me was the blueprint for the new headquarters of Bennett Air Solutions, the project I had quietly prepared for 2 years but only now had the courage to name. I spent the evening checking every detail: floor plans, renewable energy layouts, an integrated office zone for the technical teams, a break room with a small library and a meditation garden out back. I wanted to build a place where blue-collar workers could walk in with their heads high without anyone asking, "What school did you go to? Where's your degree?" At exactly 8:30 my phone buzzed. A new message popped up on the screen. It was from Mr. Mark Tennyson, director of a senior care chain where I had just completed a winter cooling system installation. "Ivy, I just dropped by the Cedar Ridge facility. The staff couldn't stop praising the system you designed. They said for the first time in 10 years, they can work night shifts without freezing their hands. Thank you for believing in the value of labor." I read the message 3 times. Not because it was hard to understand, but because it made me pause longer than usual. I put down my pen, leaned back in the chair, and stared quietly at the blueprint in front of me. Maybe for the first time in my life, I truly felt enough. Not enough money, not enough success. Just enough to stop longing for recognition from those who once ignored me. I thought back to the early years of my business, when I went door to door offering air conditioning repairs with handwritten price lists. Some days I was chased off a porch for wearing oil-stained clothes. Some weeks I worked 14 hours a day just to pay for my dad's hospital bills. Some nights I sat alone in my truck, eating cold sandwiches and watching the lights from houses I would never be invited into. But now, I no longer thought about having a seat at someone else's table. I had built my own. No silk tablecloths, no imported wine. But at that table everyone had a place. Whether technician, office assistant, or janitor, no one was called the distant cousin or the hired help. At my table, no one was looked down on just because their hands were stained with grease. I reached into the drawer and pulled out a deep red envelope. Inside were 10 Christmas cards I had handwritten for the employees who'd been with the company since the early days. I signed each one, adding a personal note of gratitude for everyone. "Marcus, thank you for taking those night shifts when no one else would. Becky, I'll never forget how you brought me soup with your own hands the day I came in sick with the flu. This is my family now. Not those who share my blood, but those who chose to stay even when I had nothing left to give except respect and trust." I stood up and walked into the quiet hallway, where the small Christmas tree Olivia and I put up last week glowed gently under warm yellow lights. I didn't decorate much. Just a few ornaments, a silver star, and a small wooden plaque hanging from the lowest branch. On it I had handwritten, "Here, worth isn't measured by your last name or degree. It's in how you treat other people." Outside, a light rain had started. Droplets tapping against the glass roof made a soft, calming sound. I slid the door open and took in a deep breath of the cool winter air. A breeze carried the scent of damp earth and the quiet breath of a new season. I stood there in silence. I didn't need holiday greetings from relatives who had turned their backs. I wasn't hoping for a late apology call or a second letter from my mother. I wasn't waiting for Julia to understand or for Layla to become the person I once hoped she'd be. I just needed what I already had. A place I built with hard work, with faith and honest labor, with the resolve to never let anyone else define my worth. I stepped back inside, turned off the office lights, leaving only the tree softly lit in the dark. As I closed the door, my eyes caught once more the blueprint of the new headquarters still taped to the wall near my desk. Beneath the company logo, I had recently added a new tagline to the final print. Bennett Air Solutions, We don't have to be like anyone else to be respected. And that was all I needed for a Christmas Eve. No pie. No empty seat at someone else's dinner table. Just the quiet knowledge that no one could ever again say I wasn't good enough to sit beside them. Because I had chosen to sit somewhere else, a place where I belonged. My story might resemble someone else's out there. Someone who's ever been undervalued simply for the job they do, or pushed out of their own family for not following the path others deemed acceptable. What about you? Have you ever stood outside a door that should have opened for you? Have you ever been dismissed just because you didn't live according to someone else's mold? I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below, whether it's something you've been through or just a thought this story brought up. Every word you share has meaning because sometimes what makes us stronger isn't applause. It's knowing someone out there gets it. And if you believe that everyone deserves respect, whether they wear a suit or a work uniform, whether they stand behind a desk or crouch under a machine, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other real, powerful stories about life, family, and the things we don't always say out loud. Because sometimes the people the world sees as small are the very ones carrying it all on their shoulders. And it's time they had a voice.